So we're going to start in Psalms 46. And you should be reading the whole psalm. I'm not going to read the whole psalm because our time is limited. We really went extra innings into the beginning portion of this before the message. And so I'm going to kind of skip some of this, but the whole psalm is just excellent. You know, it starts out with, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Absolutely spot on.
Wait, what chapter?
46. 46, Psalm 46. So God is our refuge and strength. But the part I want to head to is verse 10. God says, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the heathen, I will be exalted in the earth." What does it mean to be still and know that God is God? Yeah, calm down. Then when you feel yourself getting stressed out, stop. Relax. Don't sweat it. Go back to where you should go. You know, I think in Princess Bride, you know, Vicini goes, "Go back. I have to go back to the beginning," right? Well, for us, we're going to go back to the root of it all. What do we need first and foremost in our life? Is it a 97-year stockpile of food with 12 pounds of gold and 7,000 pounds of silver in a bunker that we can survive 17 apocalypses in? No. We could have that and we could die in a month, you know. We could have everything, you know, we think we need. We could have a battalion of Marines surrounding us constantly and still die. There's nothing except the Lord that keeps us alive. So we need to go back to the beginning. Go back to what is it that we need the most? We need God guiding our lives the most. Be still and know that I am God. I am reminded, how many have ever read The Pilgrim's Progress? One, two people have read it. You're missing the Pilgrim's Progress. You should read it if you don't want to read it, and I get it. It's a long book. On YouTube, I know there's at least a couple sites that have it on audio track. You could listen to the whole thing. It's a great book, written by John Bunyan. I almost said Paul Bunyan, but he's the dude with the big blue ox, right? The wrong Bunyan. John Bunyan. John Bunyan was a preacher in England. And he, at a time where you had to have a license from the state to preach, and you could only get a license to preach from the state if you preached what they told you to preach, and he refused. At that time, the Church of England was the one in control of all preaching in the country, and Bunyan kept preaching the word anyway. And he did not get a license. He did not get permission from the state to do his preaching, as none of us should be doing, although I would say 98% of all churches out there have permission from the state to exist in the form of 501c3 corporation. But Bunyan wrote, while he was in the Tower of London, he wrote a book called The Pilgrim's Progress. And it's an allegory of our life as a Christian. And I wish the real world was more like this book, because in the book, Christian, the hero of the story, who has gotten saved and he is on his life's journey. Everyone he meets has a name that suits their character. So he'll meet the giant of despair, and guess what? He despairs while he's around the giant of despair. And at one point he meets Mrs. Busywork. And what does Mrs. Busywork want him to do? She's just constantly saying, "You know what? I know you're headed towards the celestial kingdom," is what they would call heaven. And he said, "You're headed towards the celestial kingdom, but you need to bring the king some gifts. So let me help me make this and help me make that, and we'll have all these gifts for the kings that you can take with you on your trip." And it all sounded so good. But all she was doing was making work that didn't need to be made, And eventually he realizes, I'm just being held back by somebody who can't keep her nose out of my business and everyone else's, and just thinks being busy is the way to go. And it brings me to a point. I just want to point out our relationships with each other. What makes our relationships with each other most important?
Holy Spirit.
Okay.
Time we spend together.
Time, the Holy Spirit. What? It's the love we show. Is it what we give each other? Not really. Some of the most miserable kids I ever knew growing up got the best Christmas gifts. They get back on Christmas break, and I got this. I'd have kids in my school that got junior snowmobiles. Actual snowmobiles, a small size for them. Man, I didn't even get a bicycle. They got some cool stuff. And guess what? They were miserable. It isn't the gifts, right? It's because their parents were buying them off. Their parents, what the kids need from their parents most of all is genuine love, actual love. And sometimes that's spelled T-I-M-E, time. Sometimes it's spelled more than time. It's just attention and caring and all that. And that's the real world, So many people have ideas what we need to be doing for Christ while on this earth. And some of them are legit, some are just nonsense. But the biggest thing, the most important thing is that we love him for who he is, and we don't forget what he's done for us. And that's the same way in a marriage relationship. How many have seen, Hollywood celebrities get married and they spend $1 million on their wedding? I know one conservative talk show host who spent, I believe if I remember right, he spent $1 million on his wedding singer. He hired,
was that Elton
yeah,
John?
he hired Elton John to sing at his wedding. And how long did that wedding last? Or how long did that marriage last? I don't think he hit 2 years. He might have broken up by the time a year was up. Well, why? He had everything a woman could want, right? Lots of money. Because that's not what we really want out of a wedding, do we? Or out of a marriage. These women that marry, and it happens, and men marry for money too sometimes, they're usually quite miserable. They got everything they thought they wanted, and what they really want, the reason why we got married, Stephanie and I, is because I love her and I want her around. And till this day, we're now an old married couple, We'll be hitting 40 years soon, and I still want to hang around my wife, I still want to be near her. I'm going to read a couple verses here, and then we'll get to the final area we're going to be in. I'm just going to read Isaiah 30, verse 15. For thus saith the Lord God, the Holy One of Israel, in returning and rest ye shall be saved, in quietness and confidence shall be your strength, and you would not. What's that saying? Just calm down. Relax. Trust the Lord. And it says, in quietness and in confidence. You ever met somebody that just runs their jaw all day long about how good they are? How excellent they are? I know a guy who I won't say what sport he's in, but he's in this particular sport, and he brags constantly about how great he is and how he's the best and this and that. But whenever he's faced with actual competition, he does things to jeopardize his own ability. So then he has an excuse for the reason he failed, because he fails all the time. But he's the biggest mouth I know of when it comes to, of my personal friends, when it comes to sports. He's always talking. I am great, I'm great. Watch me, look at what I just did, Paul. This is amazing. And then when he actually has a chance to prove it facing another opponent, he always does something to cause him to fail, and then he has an excuse. Well, why? Well, why is he like that? Because it's usually the one running their mouths the most that aren't the best. Right? You want to be fearful of the guy standing back and watching, taking it all in. In the military, be careful of the guy who doesn't talk much. Be careful of the quiet one, because he probably knows what he's doing. And he doesn't have to tell everyone, because he's got quiet confidence. We should have quiet confidence in the Lord. Now, how do we get to the point where we can just sit back and trust the Lord when we don't know what to do? Well, first of all, how about shutting down the distractions around us? How many of us surround ourselves by noise? Let's just say noise all the time. Why did the grandma and grandpa, actually I would have to go back to great-grandpa and great-grandma back in the 1800s, how is it that they seem to know the Bible so well? Yeah, they didn't have all the noise surrounding them, right? My family's been watching the Waltons and reruns, obviously. And then the Waltons, they'd sit around for 1 or 2 hours a night and listen to the radio. And that was their distraction. That was their major distraction. And yet that's nothing compared to today's world. Today's world, you'll have people, their alarm clock is a radio, and it'll turn on and start in their ear. Something's going on. And all day long, if there's quiet, they don't want it. They don't want it. They don't want to think. They don't want to let their thought processes go through with something. How do you hear from the Lord with that? You don't. You don't hear His direction at all. Years ago, it's been 17 years now. 17 years ago, this coming October, I believe it was, I got suddenly very, very sick. I was always a very healthy guy, very few ailments in my life, and I got really, really sick. I lost 15 pounds in a week. They stuck me in a hospital and found out I had ulcerative colitis. That's a permanent disease. You don't get rid of ulcerative colitis. It stays with you. Even though years later I had my colon removed, you still have the root of the disease in your body the rest of your life. It's changed everything about me as far as what I do and things like that. And there was times I just didn't get. I wasn't getting answers I wanted from the Lord. I wanted answers, and I wanted them now, Well, did I ever get the answers? Eventually, I got many of the answers. But some of them I still haven't gotten. But how did I approach? You have to shut off the outside entertainment, shut off the world, and seek the answer. Just be quiet, be still. Let God speak while you speak to Him. Let Him answer, and God will give you the answers. We're going to go to our next verse before we get there. I'll go ahead and give you so you can get there. It's going to be in 1 Kings chapter 19. And I'm going to give you the background. It's Elijah is going to be our character that we're going to be watching here. Elijah has just hit perhaps the high point of his life. He just had fire rain down from heaven and burn the altars of not only God, but the altar of Baal too. He killed 300 prophets of Baal. And then Queen Jezebel threatened him, and he ran up to the mountains and hid. And he gets to the mountains, and he's depressed. He's kind of irritated. And you know what? That's something to be wary of. When you think you're on top of the world, the trip down the mountain is treacherous. When you're on top of that mountain, the trip back down is treacherous. So beware of that. And this is where Elijah was. He was seeking the Lord, and he wasn't hearing from the Lord. And I don't know what it's like to be an Old Testament prophet who's used to being able to hear from the Lord. But it was probably disconcerting to him. And so listen to what God has him go through. And 1 Kings chapter 19, starting in verse 11. And he said, "Go forth and stand upon the mount before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by. And a great strong wind rent the mountains, and brake in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice. And it was so when Elijah heard it that he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, there came a voice unto him and said, What doest thou here, Elijah? He wanted to hear from the Lord, and sometimes this is our problem. We expect the Lord to yell answers to us. We say, Paul, I've been praying over this for 6 weeks now, and I got no answer. Have you listened? Have you given him a chance to respond? Or is your face and your ears and your mind so full of yammering? And I'm the worst. I do it too. And I love to watch things that I can learn from. I'm always watching YouTube videos on skills I don't know yet. I want to know how to do everything. I don't have the energy to do any of it, but I want to know how, you know. I tell people someday if things get bad, just have me sit there and I'll tell you how to do things. I won't be able to help you with it, but I can tell you. I like knowing how to do things. But I just always want to be learning. Well, it's hard for me to sit and be still. This is a technique I have to work on for myself. The last 2 vehicles that I've had as my primary vehicle, I had a Suzuki Samurai and a Jeep Wrangler that was kind of mine, and the Wrangler was kind of the family vehicle. But tell the world about the great stereo we had in those vehicles. We didn't have nothing. We had 0 for radio in it. If I had a telephone with me, that was about as good a communication as I had. Because I like to be able, as I'm driving down the road, I could think. You know, when I'm listening to the radio, I'm not really thinking. I'm just responding to other people's input. I'm going to tell you a story. When I was a kid, I think I was 15 when this happened. I might have been 16. I went on a backpacking trip in Lake Michigan. I know you don't backpack in Lake Michigan, but there's a group of islands in Lake Michigan called the Beaver Island Group. And very cool place, very interesting. And so we went to Beaver Island, then we took a fishing boat over to, I think it was the Charlevoix ferry over to Beaver Island, and then the fishing boat over to High Island, which I believe was the second largest island in the group. And High Island has no one living there, and we just backpacked around the island for a week. And it was fun until the leader of the group said, all right, we're going to have one afternoon where we just want you to sit and pray and think about the Lord for 4 hours. So he'd walk down the beach and he'd go, all right, you sit here. And then he'd go a few hundred more yards. You sit here, you sit. And he had it all spread out so we could have our own quiet time with the Lord. And, you know, the minute he left, I prayed for like 2 or 3 minutes, and I'm like, okay, I'm done, you know. I've got everything done I need to do. I was a fine spiritual 16-year-old, right? Or 15-year-old. And pretty soon I began to, you know, edge down the island, down the beach towards the guy next to me. And he started moving my way. And 20 minutes later, we're sitting side by side having our personal time with the Lord, you know. And but it shows me, as a kid, I'm not kicking myself, boy, how I missed something there. Kids do stupid things, but that's sometimes me as an adult too. And is it you? It shouldn't be. We need to learn to be quiet and respond to God. I know some of you are thinking, how on earth will that ever happen around my house, right? Am I right there? If you got kids, no. And so just remember, though, take the time, shut off all the distractions, shut off the world for a few minutes, and get to be with the Lord. And in a few minutes, I don't mean 2 minutes. I mean a time. Think about, in Luke 5:16, this is talking about Jesus. It said, and he withdrew himself into the wilderness and prayed. Why did Jesus was God in the flesh walking on the earth. Why did he have to go off alone and pray? Because it empowers you spiritually. Even Christ was empowered spiritually. by going off by himself and praying. The world is on a warpath against us getting in touch with God, getting a real connection with who God is. They want everything to be. If you believe in God, they're okay with that, as long as this is little g God and He doesn't really have an impact on your life, and you're not really in touch with Him.
When we were first saved, that's what everybody said to us. They said, just don't go overboard. Don't carry this too far. You can go too far with this. Just don't do that.
Well, Jesus, throughout His ministry, basically said, take it too far. He said, if you follow me, you're going to be enemies with your own family. You're going to be enemies, and how many of us have experienced that? I have. You're going to be enemies with your neighbors. You're going to be enemies with the world. But yeah, today's Christianity, don't take it too far. If you make the world mad, you've probably gone too far. Well, if you haven't made the world mad, you might not be as much of a Christian as you think you are. Jesus made the world mad enough that they killed him. Any death threats on any of our lives lately? Probably not. I've actually had one over my stance in Christianity, but and that was a weird one, but that was coming from another Christian. Very, very interesting. Anyway, to close this today, take some time this week and get alone with God. And tinnitus, who cares? Make friends with the crickets. Start naming them. And the thing is, it doesn't. When I say be quiet and still and know that God, I am God, when I get out in true wilderness, it's never quiet, but it's peaceful. It's one year though, I had a huge distraction. It wasn't actually quiet. That year was like all the different types of cicadas were coming out in one year, and it was like the noisiest year ever. But it was this white noise that I kind of could ignore, and it was still peaceful, kind of. Cicadas aren't that peaceful, but anyway, just if you're seeking the Lord, you'll find him. How did you remember Daniel praying for 21 days? How did he have that breakthrough? He kept praying. He kept every day. He was seeking the Lord on that very issue. For me, it was a lot of small answers as I went. Small direction changes. God took me on a very interesting path to get to where I am today. A path that I would have never thought He would specifically guide you through, because it was several years of physical problems and ongoing. It's 17 years so far, physical problems, along with being with somebody that was a fraud, spiritually speaking, who and I knew when I agreed to, when the Lord said, you need to work with this man, I thought he was a fraud. And I thought, well, maybe the Lord's going to show me, something different about him. And then a few years later when we left, I knew he was a fraud without a doubt. But he spent those years of training were not what I thought they would be. They were training in how not to do it. Here's how you avoid becoming that. It's just I'll say most. I think most Christians today are frauds. They're academic Christians. They're cultural Christians. They're in this case probably a financial Christian. In other words, it paid off to be a Christian. You spend 1 week every month talking about money and giving money, and if you're not giving money, God's going to curse you. You can make money that way, So, but I learned a lot. It's been a blessing. I would not go back. If I could go back and say the day before I got sick, and the Lord said, hey, I'll let you go back and never get sick, and you'll be strong and healthy the rest of your life. I'll take the way he did it for me, because I'm better off in other ways. So I'm okay with that. It's been a blessing. It took me a long time to decide it was a blessing, but the first thing I did when I got sick, I don't know if I've told some of you this story, is start reading the book of Job. And I remember the guy I ended up staying and working with, he came into my hospital room and he said, "Are you reading the Bible?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm reading the book of Job." "Oh, you don't want to read that book. That's depressing." I said, "Yeah, but it's got a great ending, The book of Job, all I really did was I would read the first 3 chapters and the last 2 chapters, and constantly. And I left the stuff in the middle. Why? I mean, there's a lot to learn from the stuff in the middle, but for me it was, what happened to Job? He was a righteous man who God allowed to be afflicted, and then God gave him back what the devil had taken during that time period. Fantastic story that God used. I mean, this is a guy that he was perhaps the richest man on earth for his day. When you read how much money he had, him and Abraham were at about the same time period. They probably knew each other. I don't know, but and he was from the area Abraham was from, so that it was likely they knew at least of each other. But amazing story, the book of Job. Let's close for now, or right now, and then we'll be able to have fellowship afterwards. I love when we stick around and have a little fellowship.